On Christmas Eve, while I was sitting in my own house, my wife sent me a message telling me I had never really been part of the family. I had been paying every bill in that house for 4 years, so I opened my banking app and canceled everything. 40 minutes later, my phone showed 62 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. My name is Leonard Whitfield. I'm 62 years old, retired structural engineer living outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm telling you that up front so you know who's talking. The message came in at 4:17 in the afternoon. I was in my home office going through some paperwork when my phone lit up. Family group chat. Gloria had created that chat 2 years earlier and named it Family Plans. I remember thinking that was a good sign when she did it. A shared space. Something we were building together. Her first message read, "Nolan is joining us for Christmas dinner. The kids think it's better this way." Nolan Price, her colleague at the real estate office where she worked part-time. Then a second message came right after. "You've never really been part of this family, Leonard. Maybe it's time you accepted that." I read it twice, then a third time. Then I opened my banking app. I want to back up a little because this didn't come out of nowhere. 8 months before that Christmas Eve, I had started keeping a running list in my notes app. My friend Howard Garland suggested it. Howard spent 22 years as a police officer before moving into insurance, and he has a way of cutting straight to the point that I have always appreciated. We were having coffee one Saturday morning, and I told him something felt off at home. Couldn't name it exactly. Gloria had been working late more often. She got a new phone and kept it face down on tables. Small things. Howard looked at me and said, "Write it down, Leonard. When it's in writing, you can actually see it." So I had been writing it down for 8 months. The weekend trips she called company retreats. The $340 dinner charge on the joint visa she said was client entertainment. The way she laughed differently when she took calls in the other room. The way she stopped asking how my day went. The way Nolan Price's name kept coming up in conversation. Always casual, always explained away. I wasn't certain. That's what I kept telling myself. Not certain. But reading those words on my phone on Christmas Eve afternoon, I think some part of me had been certain for a long time. I put the phone down on the desk and sat there for maybe 2 minutes looking out the window at the backyard. My first wife, Norma, had planted a row of reed buds along the back fence this spring after we bought the house. She passed 6 years ago from an illness that moved faster than anyone expected. Those red buds had come back every year since, without any help from me. In December they were bare, just thin branches against a gray sky, but I knew what they looked like in April and that was enough. Biscuit was lying by the back door. Old Yellow Lab, who had been Norma's idea, and who had outlasted a lot of things in this house. He looked up at me when I walked past, then put his head back down. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the counter for a minute. Then I went back to my desk and opened the banking app. The joint household account pulled $4,200 every month. That covered the mortgage, utilities, groceries, everything. My income, my retirement funds, my name on the account. I had set it all up when Gloria and I got married 4 years ago because it seemed like the right thing to do. Take care of the household. Be the provider. That was how I was raised and I never questioned it. I canceled the joint transfer first. Then I went through everything else. The auto pay on Gloria's car note, canceled. The subscription services tied to my account, canceled. Every scheduled transfer I could find, one by one methodically, the way I used to check load calculations on a job site. You go through each connection point. You don't skip anything then. I went back to the family chat, typed one line and read it twice before sending. Understood, canceling all transfers as of tonight. Merry Christmas. I left the chat. I set the phone face down on the desk, walked to the kitchen, and made a pot of coffee. Norma always kept a good bag of coffee in the freezer for the kind of day when you needed something steady. I had kept that habit going. Some things are worth keeping. By the time the coffee was ready, I had 34 missed calls on the screen. I didn't pick up. I poured my coffee, sat in the chair by the living room window, and watched the street outside, Christmas Eve in suburban Tennessee. Neighbors carrying bags from cars into houses, kids running ahead of their parents in winter coats. The old oaks on my block holding their bare branches up against the last of the daylight. I thought about Norma. I thought about the 28 years we had together, and the man I had been in that marriage, and the man I had somehow stopped being in this one. By the time I went to bed, the missed calls had reached 62. I slept fine. Christmas morning I made eggs, listened to the radio, and watched a light snow come down on the backyard deck. Biscuit got an extra treat because it felt like the right thing to do. I ate alone at the kitchen table, and the house was quiet in a way that didn't bother me. It was my house. It had always been my house. I had bought it with Norma back in 2009. 3 bedrooms, attached garage, the redbud trees she insisted on planting even though the landscaper said they were too close to the fence. The house was worth around $380,000 now, maybe more. Gloria had never been on the deed. When we got married, I told myself we would sort out the paperwork eventually. We never did. At the time, I thought that was just a thing we hadn't gotten around to. Looking back, I think some part of me already knew to be careful. I called Howard around noon. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. The messages, the transfers, the name Nolan Price. All of it. Howard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "How long has Price been at that office?" I told him about 8 months, based on when Gloria first mentioned his name. Howard said, "All right, don't do anything else yet. Let me make a few calls, and Leonard document everything you have. Every message, every transfer confirmation, every record. I already had most of it." That afternoon, I opened a spreadsheet and organized everything going back to when Gloria and I had combined finances after the wedding. Every automatic transfer, every date, every amount. When I added it up, the number came to just over $200,000. I sat with that number for a while, $200,000 over 4 years. That was real money. That was the kind of money that takes years to save and disappears faster than you expect when you're not paying attention to where it goes. Norma and I had talked about traveling after I retired. Portugal, maybe, Scotland. We had put it off the way you put things off when you think there's plenty of time ahead of you. There wasn't. After she passed, I told myself I was being generous with Gloria because that was what Norma would have wanted. Take care of the people around you. Don't be stingy with the people you love. Howard called back 2 days after Christmas. He had looked into Nolan Price through public records, nothing illegal. Just the kind of background check a man with 22 years in law enforcement knows how to run. Nolan had finalized his own divorce about 2 years prior. There had been a property dispute with his ex-wife that dragged on for months. He had joined Gloria's real estate office right around the same time I started noticing the changes at home. 8 months, same window as my notes app list. Howard said, "Leonard, I think you already know what's going on. The question is what you want to do about it." I told him I wanted to do it right. No shortcuts, nothing that could come back on me. I wanted to be able to stand in front of a judge and have everything be clean. He said, "Then you need Sylvia Tran." I was in Sylvia's office the week between Christmas and New Year's. She worked out of a small firm in downtown Nashville, second floor of a brick building 2 blocks off Broadway. No frills, no fancy lobby, just a woman who had been doing divorce law for 18 years and knew exactly what she was looking at when I put my documentation on her desk. She went through the spreadsheet, the bank records, the printed notes app list. She asked me a few questions, then she pulled up something her paralegal had already started compiling. She turned her screen toward me. In the 5 months before Christmas Eve, $19,400 had moved out of our joint savings account in separate transfers. 4 transactions, each one a few $1,000s, all going to an account I didn't recognize, an account in Gloria's name only. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I looked up at Sylvia. She said, "In Tennessee, that's called dissipation of marital assets. It is a factor in how a court divides property." I asked her what our overall position looked like. She said Tennessee is a fault divorce state. Adultery is a recognized fault ground and it directly affects asset division. "The house, you bought that before this marriage?" I told her yes. Norma and I bought it in 2009 after Norma passed. It transferred to me outright. Gloria had never been on the deed. Sylvia said, "Then the house is yours." That's not a contested asset. Your position coming in is about as strong as I see. She told me the next step was documentation of the relationship between Gloria and Nolan. She gave me the name of a private investigator she worked with regularly, a woman named Beverly who ran a small firm out of Brentwood. Thorough, professional, everything done correctly and usable in court. I asked Sylvia what her retainer was. She told me. I wrote the check without hesitating. Walking out to my truck, I called Howard and told him how it went. He said, "Good, you're doing this the right way." I told him I didn't know any other way to do it. That was true, but I also knew that doing it the right way was the only thing that was going to make this feel like something other than a loss when it was over. Beverly delivered her report 3 weeks into January. She was exactly what Sylvia had described. Quiet, professional, no drama. When she handed me the folder in her office, she walked me through everything it contained. Photographs with timestamps, location records from 2 separate occasions, written observations from a third. All of it legal, all of it documented in a way that would hold up if it needed to. I drove home and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the folder for a long time without opening it again. I already knew what was in it. Seeing it confirmed wasn't a surprise. It was more like the last piece of something you have been building in your head for months finally clicking into place. Not relief exactly. More like the strange stillness that comes when you stop waiting for something and it finally arrives. Biscuit came over and put his head on my knee the way he does when he senses something is off. I scratched his ears and told him he was a good dog. He has always been a good dog. I called Sylvia the next morning and told her the report was ready. She said she would contact Beverly directly for the evidentiary copies. Then she said, "Leonard, I want you to be prepared. Once we file, things tend to move quickly. Gloria will likely respond with something designed to control the narrative. People in her position often do. I told her I was prepared. I wasn't entirely prepared." Gloria called on a Thursday in late January. I had been answering a handful of her calls by then, short conversations, nothing productive. Mostly her cycling through versions of the same story. Nolan was a friend. I had misunderstood. I was being reactive. This one was different. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. She said she knew I had been making inquiries. She said if I was planning to go after her in court, she would make sure people knew what kind of husband I had really been. She used the words controlling and emotionally withholding and said she had been miserable for years. I let her finish. Then I said, "Gloria, my attorney will handle everything from here. I won't be discussing this by phone." I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes after that, not angry exactly, more tired than anything. 28 years with Norma and I never once had a conversation that felt like a negotiation over who got to be the victim. I had not realized until right then how much energy it takes to be in a marriage where you're always slightly off balance, always adjusting, always wondering what you missed. Howard came over for dinner that Friday. His wife Pauline sent a casserole dish she had made, which was the kind of thing she always did when someone in her orbit was going through something hard. Howard and I sat at the kitchen table after dinner with 2 glasses of bourbon, and he let me talk as much or as little as I wanted. At one point he said, "You know, the hardest part of what you're doing, it's not the legal stuff. The legal stuff has a process. The hard part is accepting that the person you married was not who you thought she was." I told him I had been working on that. He said, "Norma was the real thing, Leonard. You know what that looks like? That's actually what makes this harder, not easier." He was right about that. Knowing what a good marriage feels like makes a bad one more confusing, not less. You keep looking for the person you thought was there. In early February, Sylvia filed the divorce petition. Gloria retained her own attorney, a man named Gary Hollister, who Sylvia said was competent and would advise her honestly about her position, which meant he would tell her the evidence was solid, the fault grounds were established, and fighting it aggressively would cost more than it would gain. 2 weeks after the filing, Philip came to my door, my son, 31 years old, Gloria's son from a previous relationship, a kid I had helped raise for the past 4 years and had genuinely grown to care about. He was standing on the front step in his jacket looking like he had not slept properly in weeks, which was probably accurate. I let him in, made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. He talked for a long time. He said he had noticed things at home for months. The way his mother talked about Nolan the late evenings. The shifted stories. He said he hadn't said anything because he didn't know how. Because every time he thought about bringing it up, he told himself maybe he was wrong, maybe it wasn't his place, maybe it would blow over. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I asked him one question. "Philip, were you going to say any of this if I hadn't canceled the transfers?" He looked at the table. He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, Dad. Honestly, I don't know. That was a hard thing to sit with. But it was honest, and I respected the honesty even when it hurt. A man who tells you the uncomfortable truth is worth more than one who tells you what you want to hear." I told him the legal process would run its course. I told him I hoped we could find a way through this. He nodded. When he left, we shook hands at the door. It was a start. Gloria posted on Facebook on a Monday morning in mid-February. I don't use Facebook myself. Harriet called me. Harriet is Norma's aunt, 79 years old, still does her own crossword every morning without help, and has been one of the sharpest people in my life since the day I met her. She called at 8 in the morning and said, "Leonard, you need to know what she has written." I drove out to Harriet's retirement community in Franklin. She showed me on her tablet. Gloria had written about being financially abandoned by her husband without warning. She wrote about feeling controlled during the marriage, about a man who used money as leverage, about being left with nothing right before Christmas while her children watched. She had included a photo of Marlene and Mason, Philip's kids, my grandchildren, 9 and 6 years old, standing in their winter coats in front of the house looking solemn. She had not asked Philip before posting that photo. The post had been shared 38 times. I read it twice. Harriet watched me read it. When I set the tablet down, she said, "What are you going to do?" I took out my phone and pulled up the screenshots of the Christmas Eve group chat. The exact messages, the exact timestamps, Gloria's words. "You've never really been part of this family, Leonard. Maybe it's time you accepted that." All of it right there in the record. I forwarded the screenshots to 3 people. Howard, who already knew everything. Harriet, who was sitting right across from me and would know exactly what to do with the information. And my neighbor Clifford, a retired contractor who had known both Gloria and me for the better part of 3 years and whose opinion carried real weight in the circle of people we both knew. I sent one line with each message. This is what prompted my decision. I won't be posting publicly, but you deserve the full picture. I did not comment on Gloria's post. I did not respond publicly. I did not defend myself online. I drove home and let it sit. Within 4 days, the tone of the comments on her post had shifted. A few people who had written supportive things went quiet. Someone left a comment saying there was more to the story. 2 women Gloria worked with at the real estate office. People who had seen the screenshots circulate through Clifford's network stopped returning her calls. Nolan, according to Howard, had gotten noticeably quiet at the office and was keeping his head down. Gloria deleted the post by the end of that week. Harriet called me the evening Gloria deleted it. She didn't make a big thing of it. She just said, "Good, now let the lawyers finish it." The divorce hearing was scheduled for late April. Sylvia had been clear with me from the start about what to expect. Tennessee fault divorce proceedings with documented evidence tend to move towards settlement rather than trial. Gloria's attorney, Gary Hollister, as Sylvia had predicted, advised her correctly once he saw the full picture. The fault grounds were established. The dissipation of the $19,400 was on the record. Fighting aggressively would cost Gloria more in legal fees than she stood to gain. The hearing itself was quieter than I expected. I sat in a courtroom that smelled like old carpet and fluorescent lights and listened to the proceedings with the same attention I used to give to site inspections. The judge reviewed Beverly's documentation. He reviewed the transfer records and the $19,400 dissipation. He reviewed the deed to the house. When it was done, the ruling was straightforward. I kept the house outright, the same as it had always been. The remaining joint assets, a small rental property we had bought together 2 years into the marriage, and 2 investment accounts, were divided 60-40 in my favor. The $19,400 Gloria had transferred was factored into her share of the division. Total outcome in my favor after everything was settled. The house at $380,000 plus roughly $11 from the asset split. I shook Sylvia's hand outside the courtroom. She said, "You handled this well, Leonard. You kept your head the entire time." I thanked her and meant it more than I could easily say. I drove home on the interstate with the radio off. Just the sound of the truck and the road. I had gone into that marriage believing I was doing the right things. Paying the bills, keeping the household running, being steady and reliable and present in the ways I knew how to be. Norma used to say that the best thing a man could do for his family was show up consistently, not dramatically, just consistently. I had tried to do that. The problem was I had confused showing up financially with being genuinely valued. Those are not the same thing. They can look the same from the inside for a long time before the difference becomes impossible to ignore. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a minute before going inside. The redbuds along the back fence were in full bloom. Pink all the way down the fence line, the way they were every April, the way Norma had imagined them when she picked them out at the nursery and said, "These ones, Leonard, right here." I went inside and fed Biscuit his dinner. Then I made myself a decent meal for the first time in weeks and ate it at my own kitchen table in my own house and felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could easily say. Steady, just steady. Harriet called in May and asked if I would come to Sunday lunch at her place in Franklin. Philip was bringing the kids. She said it carefully, the way Harriet says things she has thought through. Not a confrontation, Leonard, not a pressure situation, just lunch. Marlene and Mason have been asking about you. I drove out on a Sunday when Tennessee smelled like honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass and the sky was that particular shade of blue that only shows up in late spring. Harriet's retirement community has a dining room that looks out over a garden courtyard. She had the windows open and a fan turning slowly overhead and a spread on the table that made it clear she had been cooking since morning. Marlene saw me first in the hallway. She is 9 years old and has her father's eyes and her grandmother Norma's way of reading a room before she walks into it. She stopped for just a second, working something out. Then she walked over and hugged me around the middle without saying anything. I put my hand on her shoulder. That was enough. Mason was behind Philip, watching with the careful expression of a 6-year-old who has picked up on the fact that something complicated is happening with the adults around him. Harriet said, "Mason, your grandfather brought those cookies from the bakery on Main Street." The careful expression resolved itself into something considerably more interested. Philip and I shook hands. It was not easy. It was not supposed to be easy yet. but it was honest, and after everything that had happened, honest felt like exactly the right place to start. We had lunch. Harriet had made her pot roast, which she has been making since before I knew her, and which remains one of the best things I have ever eaten at anyone's table. After lunch, we played a card game that Marlene dominated from the first hand with a focus that reminded me of Norma doing a crossword, complete and unhurried. Mason's running commentary on every play was the best entertainment I had had in months. At some point in the afternoon, Mason climbed up onto the arm of my chair and pointed out a cardinal sitting on the garden fence outside, red as anything. He said, "Grandpa, do you have birds at your house?" I told him I had some, mostly sparrows lately, but I was working on attracting more. He said, "I want to come see them." I said, "Then you will have to come visit." He looked at me the way 6-year-olds look at you when they are being completely sincere about something. Okay, next time I drove home along the back roads with the windows down, past farms and tree lines and small white churches with their marquee signs out front. The kind of drive that reminds you why you chose to live where you live. By summer, I had settled into a routine that felt like mine again. Coffee in the morning. Some part-time consulting work, light engineering projects, enough to keep my mind active without running my calendar. Walks with Biscuit along the creek trail behind the neighborhood. Sunday lunches at Harriet's when the kids were there, which had become a regular occasion. Howard and Pauline came for dinner twice in July, and one Saturday the four of us drove out to a winery in Arrington that turned out to be worth every mile of the drive. I was present for things in a way I had not been in years. It is surprising how much attention you have available when you're not quietly managing someone else's decisions every month, not tracking whether a transfer cleared, not wondering what the next unexpected expense was going to be framed as, not adjusting yourself to fit a version of your own life that never quite felt like it belonged to you. Late August, I got a letter in the mail. Harriet's handwriting on the outside, but inside was a folded piece of paper with a drawing on the front in crayon. A house, a man with gray hair, a dog, 2 kids, a bird. Inside, in careful printing, "Grandpa, can we come see the birds soon? Love, Marlene and Mason." Mason drew the dog, and at the bottom in bigger, less steady handwriting, the dog is Biscuit. I stood at the front door and read it twice. Then I went and found a frame for it. There's something I kept coming back to all through those months. For a long time I confused what I provided with what I was worth. I kept the accounts funded and the household running and told myself that was what a good man did. And maybe it was for a while, but somewhere along the way it stopped being generosity and became a habit of proving myself to people who had already decided I was optional. It took 7 words in a group chat on a Christmas Eve to make me finally see the full picture clearly. Gloria thought she was cutting me down. It turned out she cut me free. If any part of this story sounds familiar, if you have been in a situation where you kept giving and kept being told it was not enough, leave a comment below. We read every single one, and if you're new here, subscribe. There is more where this came from.